The human soldier, David, had never been to an alien world before. His assignment was simple: deliver a peace offering and make contact with the alien princess. But when he arrived on the distant planet, nothing felt simple. The palace was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires of strange, shimmering metal reached into the sky, and the air felt thick with the weight of an ancient civilization. He couldn't shake the feeling that this place had secrets it didn't want to share. David had trained for months for this moment, but as he stood in front of the grand doors of the palace, he began to question if he was ready. The princess he was about to meet was said to be cold, calculated, and distrustful of outsiders. No one had ever truly broken through her tough exterior, and now David was supposed to try. The massive doors opened slowly, revealing a room that looked like it belonged in another galaxy. The walls were adorned with glowing symbols, and the floor was made of smooth stone that seemed to shift colors as if alive. The princess was already waiting in the center of the room, her posture rigid and commanding. She had eyes that seemed to pierce through him, a face as beautiful as it was intimidating. Her silver armor gleamed, and her long black hair flowed down her back like a river of darkness. "Who are you, human?" she asked coldly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "And why have you come?" David cleared his throat, trying to remain composed. "I've come to offer peace," he said. "Humanity wants to build a relationship with your people." The princess tilted her head, studying him as if he were a curiosity. "Peace? You expect me to believe that? Why are you really here?" Her voice held a dangerous edge, one that made David's heart race. David's mind raced as he tried to figure out how to answer. He had been told that the princess was suspicious of all outsiders, especially humans, but he had to remain calm and earn her trust. "I assure you, Your Highness, I have no hidden agenda. I'm here to help, to make sure our two worlds don't fall into conflict." She crossed her arms, a skeptical expression crossing her face. "Help? Humans? You must think me a fool. Everyone who's come to us before has wanted something in return. What makes you different?" David had been prepared for her distrust, but hearing it so plainly made him realize just how difficult this would be. "I don't want anything from you. I'm only here to ensure peace, to show that humanity is different. I have nothing to offer except my word." The princess narrowed her eyes. "Your word?" She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. "I've seen many words before. They mean nothing. Actions, human. Actions are what speak." David felt a wave of frustration rising inside him, but he kept it in check. "I'm offering action. We don't want to fight. We don't want to conquer. We just want to find a way to coexist." The princess smirked, shaking her head. "You think I'm foolish, human. Why should I believe you? What is it that you want from me?" David hesitated. This wasn't how he'd imagined this conversation going. He'd read about alien diplomacy, but this was different. She was angry, defensive, and completely unwilling to trust him. Still, he couldn't back down. This was a chance for peace, and he had to make her see it. "I don't want anything from you, Your Highness," he said, his voice steady. "I just want to help." The princess stepped back, her eyes still filled with doubt. "We'll see about that, human. We'll see if your actions match your words." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. David knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he was determined. He couldn't fail. Not now. The fate of humanity and the future of this alien world might depend on what happened next. David stood in the grand hall of the alien palace, feeling more like an intruder than a diplomat. The princess, though beautiful and regal, radiated distrust. Her cold gaze had never wavered since their first meeting, and every word she spoke was sharp, as if slicing through the air between them. Her words had lingered in his mind. "Why should I believe you?" He had offered peace, but she refused to trust him, convinced there was a hidden motive behind his every action. He glanced around, noticing the sheer scale of the palace. The walls were etched with strange symbols that hummed with energy, casting an eerie glow over the room. Yet none of it could distract him from the princess's eyes, which seemed to look straight through him. No matter how many times he tried to explain, she wasn't listening, and that made his mission all the more difficult. Your people have invaded other planets before. What makes you think this time will be different? The princess asked suddenly, her voice dripping with suspicion. I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. David was taken aback by her bluntness, but he quickly regained his composure. We've never invaded anyone. We're not like that anymore, he explained. Humanity has learned from its mistakes. We've changed. The princess let out a bitter laugh. Change? You think your people have changed? You're all just like the others who came before you, trying to take what isn't yours. You say you want peace, but I've heard that line too many times. David could feel the anger rising inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had to win her trust, no matter how hard it seemed. He had been trained for this, but no amount of training had prepared him for the princess's hostility. I'm not like the others, he said firmly. I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to help. She stepped closer, narrowing her eyes. Help? Do you think I'm a fool, human? I've lived through countless betrayals, and all you have to offer is empty promises. David clenched his fists, but he did his best to control his temper. I'm not asking for anything in return, just a chance to prove it. The princess looked at him with a mix of confusion and anger. She had never encountered someone so stubborn, someone who didn't back down in the face of her fury. Prove it, she scoffed. How do you plan on doing that? Tell me, what exactly are you offering? David hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. He wasn't a skilled negotiator, and his mission wasn't to offer wealth or technology. But he had something else, something more human than anything the princess might expect. He was offering honesty, vulnerability, and the hope of a better future. I offer my actions. I will help defend your planet if that's what it takes. I will fight alongside you. I won't just say I want peace. I'll show you, he said with quiet determination. The princess stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she looked away. I don't need your help, she muttered under her breath, but David heard it clearly. He didn't know whether she meant it or not, but he wasn't going to give up. Not yet. He'd spent his entire life fighting for a cause. This wasn't any different. He could see the pain behind her eyes, the deep scars that had been left by betrayal. It wasn't just the planet she was guarding. It was her heart. David was beginning to understand the princess. He wasn't there to win her favor. He was there to prove that humans could be trusted. The road ahead would be long, and the obstacles would be many, but he wasn't going to back down. Just give me a chance, he said softly. For a moment, it seemed like the princess might speak again, but she turned and walked away, leaving David standing alone in the cold, grand hall. As he watched her leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had imagined. The next day, David found himself summoned to the princess's private chambers. It was a quiet, almost eerie place, tucked away in the heart of the palace. The room was filled with artifacts from her people's long history, each piece telling a story of power, war, and conquest. It was clear that the princess was someone of great importance, and her world had shaped her in ways David couldn't yet understand. She was sitting by a window, gazing out at the alien landscape. The sky was a strange shade of violet, and the distant mountains glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. David hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "Your Highness," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You asked to see me." The princess didn't turn to face him right away. She continued to stare out the window, her expression unreadable. It felt like an eternity before she spoke. "You wanted to help," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. "But do you even know what you're offering?" David was taken aback by the question. I want to offer peace and a chance to build something better." The princess slowly turned to look at him, her face cold, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something vulnerable. You think that's possible? David nodded. I do. I believe we can make this work, but I need you to trust me. She scoffed. Trust? Do you think I trust anyone? David frowned. I understand your hesitation, but if you just give me a chance. No, you don't understand, she interrupted sharply. You don't understand what it's like to be me. David was silent for a moment. Then help me understand, he said quietly. For the first time, the princess seemed to hesitate. She lowered her gaze and stood up, walking over to a nearby table where a large ornate bowl sat. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, lost in thought. I was born into a world of constant war, she began, her voice soft but filled with pain. My people have been fighting for centuries. My father was a warrior, a king who ruled with fear. He taught me that power was everything. That weakness was a death sentence. I was raised to believe that I had to be strong, that I couldn't afford to trust anyone. David listened, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. The princess's life had been shaped by fear, not love. She had been taught to distrust, to be guarded at all costs. When I was younger, I believed in that. I believed that my father's way was the only way, she continued. But everything changed when I lost him. The betrayal came from within my own court. A close ally turned against us, and it was my own people who destroyed everything. The princess's voice broke for a moment, and David could see the pain in her eyes. It was clear now that her distrust came from a deep well of hurt, from a past full of deception and loss. I watched as my people tore themselves apart, she said quietly. And now, I'm supposed to trust you, a human who walks into my world with promises of peace. David stepped forward, his voice gentle. I don't want to cause you more pain. I just want to help. The princess met his gaze, her expression unreadable. You want to help? She looked away, her eyes distant. I don't know if I can believe that. I don't know if I can ever believe anyone again. David didn't know what to say. He couldn't change her past, but he could prove that he wasn't like the others who had hurt her. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging between them. Finally, the princess spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. I'm not asking for your help, human, she said, her tone cold but with a flicker of something else beneath it. But if you truly want to prove that humans can be trusted, then show me. David nodded, determined. I will. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The princess might not trust him yet, but he had a chance to change that. All he had to do was prove that his actions were worth more than any words. The road ahead was uncertain, but David wasn't giving up. Not now. Not after everything he had learned about her pain and the walls she had built around herself. The challenge was clear. If he wanted to break through her defenses, he would have to be patient. But one thing was for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. The following morning, the peaceful atmosphere of the palace was shattered. An urgent message arrived, sent by a scout who had detected movement on the outskirts of the planet. The enemy fleet, a coalition of hostile alien races, was closing in, and the princess's advisors were frantic. The planet was not prepared for an attack, and the princess's people were scattered, divided, and vulnerable. David could feel the tension in the air as the princess stood at the center of her war room, her face set in a grim expression. Her royal guards moved quickly around the room, organizing a defense that seemed far too little, far too late. The princess had a fierce reputation for leading her people, but even she couldn't deny that the situation was dire. The princess turned to David, her cold eyes locking with his. I don't trust you, she said, her voice sharp. But I need you. You've been in battle, haven't you? David nodded. I've fought in many wars. I've led men into battle. I know strategy, and I can help. Her gaze softened just a fraction. It was the smallest sign of acknowledgement, but it was something. Then prove it. Help us defend this planet. David stepped forward, his mind already calculating their next move. The princess had offered him a chance, and he couldn't waste it. He began to speak quickly, explaining a plan to organize a defensive perimeter around the palace. He suggested using the city's high ground to set up sniper positions, positioning the heavy artillery along the most likely path of the enemy's advance. His ideas were met with skepticism at first, but as he laid out the details, the princess's officers began to listen. "Your plan is interesting," the princess said, her tone still guarded. "But we've never fought an enemy like this before. They're ruthless, organized. They'll underestimate us," David replied. "That's their mistake." David's confidence seemed to rub off on the princess, and she turned to her officers with renewed focus. "Do as he says," she ordered. "We'll follow his plan." The battle preparations began in earnest. David worked alongside the princess's soldiers, coordinating the setup of their defenses. As he moved through the city, he saw the fear in the eyes of the alien citizens, but there was something else there too, a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the human soldier could be trusted. Hours passed, and the enemy fleet arrived, their ships hovering ominously in the sky. The first wave of enemy soldiers landed, their metallic armor gleaming in the harsh light of the twin suns. They marched forward with a confidence born of years of conquest. David and the princess watched from a high vantage point. The city spread out below them. The first shots were fired, signaling the start of the battle. David's heart raced, but his mind remained sharp. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself. The first wave of attackers was met with heavy resistance from the snipers positioned in the high towers, and the enemy faltered. But that was just the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The princess, standing beside him, didn't flinch as the sounds of war grew louder. She remained calm, her eyes narrowed in determination. "Is this what you wanted, human?" she asked quietly. David nodded. "This is just the start. We'll win this battle, and we'll do it together." She looked at him, her face unreadable. "I'm not used to relying on others." "You don't have to do this alone," David said, offering her a small but genuine smile. The princess didn't smile back, but there was something in her gaze, a flicker of something softer, a recognition of the trust he was offering, even if she wasn't ready to fully accept it yet. For now, they had a battle to fight, and for the first time, David felt like he might not be fighting it alone. The battle raged on for hours. David and the princess stood side by side on the front lines, each move, each decision, a delicate balance of trust and strategy. The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the air as the enemy pressed forward, relentless in their assault. But David's plan was holding up. The defenses they had set up, snipers in the towers, artillery positioned along the main road, were working. The enemy, though numerous, wasn't prepared for such a well-coordinated resistance. The princess, her once cold demeanor softening slightly, moved between her soldiers, giving orders and encouraging her people. She was a leader, no doubt about it, and her presence inspired confidence in her troops. David watched as she commanded with precision, but there was something more in her actions now, something that had shifted since the first meeting. "Keep moving. Don't let them push us back," she shouted, her voice strong and authoritative. David couldn't help but admire her. She was no longer the distant princess he had met when he first arrived. The fierce warrior woman in front of him had earned his respect. She had been tested, just as he had been, and was now leading her people with a calm that only came through experience. Despite the chaos, there was a certain calmness between them now. David moved between positions, checking on the soldiers, offering guidance where needed. The princess, though still skeptical, had started trusting his judgment more. She followed his orders without question, something that had never happened with any of her previous advisors. "I didn't expect you to be this good at this," she admitted, her voice quieter as she approached him during a brief lull in the fighting. David smiled, not breaking his focus on the battlefield. "I've seen enough combat to know what works. The key is always staying one step ahead of the enemy." The princess nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon, where the enemy's second wave was starting to form. I never thought I'd need help from a human, but here we are. David met her gaze. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see things differently, and sometimes all it takes is one person to make a difference. She didn't respond, but the slight shift in her expression told him she was thinking about it. There was no longer the sharp anger she had once shown him, no longer the distrust. Instead, there was something else: respect, maybe even gratitude. Suddenly, a shout broke through the moment. The enemy had broken through a section of their defenses, and a new wave of attackers was rushing in. David snapped into action, immediately barking orders to his team. The princess was right beside him, her eyes hard with determination. "Stay with me," she said, grabbing his arm as they moved to the front lines together. David was taken aback by her sudden closeness, but he didn't hesitate. They fought side by side, their movements synchronized as if they had been doing this for years. The princess's combat skills were impressive, and her speed and strength in battle made it clear why she had earned her reputation. As they pushed back the attackers, David couldn't help but notice the way the princess was starting to rely on him. She wasn't just giving orders anymore. She was working with him, trusting him to handle the parts of the battle where her knowledge fell short. The two of them made a powerful team, and for the first time, David felt that the tide was turning. The enemy's advance had slowed, and their forces were beginning to retreat. The battlefield was still full of chaos, but there was a sense of victory in the air. After hours of intense fighting, the final push came. The last wave of enemy soldiers, disorganized and fatigued, tried to break through, but David's plan had worked. The princess's people had held their ground. Together, they had defeated an enemy much larger and stronger than them. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, the princess stood next to David, breathing heavily but standing tall. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was no suspicion, no anger. There was only a quiet acknowledgement of the trust they had built. "We did it," she said, her voice low but filled with something close to admiration. David smiled, his heart still racing from the battle. We did. It wasn't just a victory for the planet. It was a victory for them both. The princess had let go of her doubts, and in return, David had earned her trust. It was a small step, but it was a start. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the battlefield, David realized that perhaps this wasn't just about a mission. Perhaps it was about something more. The days following the battle were quieter, but the tension between David and the princess had shifted. The once icy walls she had built around herself were starting to crack, though not completely. She was still guarded, but now there was a sense of respect that hadn't been there before. David found himself working alongside her more often. They began meeting in the palace's war room, discussing the aftermath of the battle and planning for future challenges. It was clear that the princess valued his input, even if she didn't openly admit it. Every now and then, David caught glimpses of the leader she truly was, a strong, intelligent woman, capable of making hard decisions, but it was her moments of vulnerability that intrigued him the most. One evening, as they went over battle strategies, the princess paused, her eyes focused on a map of the planet. She looked tired, her face a little softer than usual. David noticed the subtle change in her. She had always been strong, but now he could see the weight she carried: responsibility, grief, and a deep loneliness. "You don't have to do all of this alone," David said softly, his voice quiet, careful not to break the fragile silence between them. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her eyes met his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "I've always had to do things alone," she replied, her voice tight, but there was a hint of something more, something raw that she rarely let show. David stepped closer, not wanting to press her, but feeling the need to speak. "You don't have to anymore," he repeated. "I'm here to help, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the princess simply stared at him. There was no anger in her eyes now, no challenge. Instead, there was something else, a flicker of understanding, maybe even hope. But she quickly masked it, turning back to the map. "I've spent too many years depending on no one," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trusting people only leads to betrayal. I can't afford to trust again." David knew it wasn't something that could be fixed with just words. He could tell that it would take time to truly break through the walls she had built. But he was patient. He wasn't like the others who had failed her. He would prove that she could trust him. As the weeks passed, their work together continued. The battle slowed, but the threats didn't disappear. They were still at war, still on the edge of a fragile peace. And though they worked tirelessly to secure the future of the planet, David couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle, the one between them, had only just begun. There were moments when they shared something more than strategy. Sometimes, when they were walking through the palace gardens, David would see her glance at him from the corner of her eye. For a brief instant, it seemed as though she was considering him differently, not just as a soldier, but as someone she could rely on. One evening, as they sat on a balcony overlooking the city, the princess spoke again, her voice quieter than usual. "I never thought a human could make a difference, but you've shown me something I never expected." David looked at her, his heart beating a little faster. "I'm just trying to help." She turned to face him, her eyes softening. "You've done more than that. You've shown me that maybe I've been wrong about trust." The word hung in the air, and for a moment, David could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had fought to earn her trust, and now she was acknowledging it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I won't let you down," David said quietly, his gaze steady. The princess didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the stars, her expression contemplative. The distance between them wasn't gone, but it was smaller now. She had let him in, just a little. And for the first time, David felt a sense of peace. The mission, the war, it all seemed to fade away in that moment. What mattered was that, for the first time, the princess wasn't looking at him with suspicion. She was looking at him as someone who had proven himself, someone she might finally trust. The peace they had fought for was fragile. Though the princess and David had made strides in building trust between them, the galaxy outside their world was still full of threats. As days passed, rumors began circulating, whispers of enemies gathering strength, planning their next move. The quiet after the battle was only temporary, and David could feel the storm coming. One evening, as David and the princess stood in her war room, a sudden alarm blared through the palace. A breach had been detected near the outer walls. David's instincts kicked in immediately. "Prepare the troops," he said, moving toward the communications panel. He could see the panic in the princess's eyes, but there was also determination. She wasn't the same woman he had met weeks ago. She was now a leader, ready to face whatever came next. "I'll lead the defense," she said, her voice sharp with authority. But just as they began to organize, a member of her inner council rushed into the room, his face pale. "Your Highness," he said, his voice shaking. "There's been a betrayal. Someone within our own ranks has turned against us." The princess froze. Betrayal wasn't something new to her, but hearing it from her trusted officers was something entirely different. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. She had trusted these people, relied on them, and now one of them had betrayed her. David turned to the princess. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice hard. The officer hesitated before speaking. "General Varric," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The princess's face paled. "Varric? He's been with us for years." "I know, Your Highness," the officer replied, "but he's aligned himself with the enemy. They're coming for us, and they're using him from the inside." David's blood ran cold. He had seen betrayal before, but never like this. The princess was already moving, her hand gripping the hilt of a weapon as she prepared for what was about to come. "Varric must be stopped," the princess said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's a traitor." David stepped forward. "We'll stop him. Together." They moved quickly, assembling a small team of soldiers loyal to the princess. The plan was simple. Find Varric before he could deliver the planet's defenses to the enemy, and end this threat before it could spiral out of control. But something felt off. The betrayal cut deeper than any battle wound. As they approached the command center, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The silence in the corridors was unsettling, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. He glanced at the princess, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I trusted him," she said softly, more to herself than to David. "I thought he was loyal. How could I have been so wrong?" David placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort, though he knew it wasn't enough. "You did what you had to do. You trusted him because he earned it. This isn't on you." She didn't respond, her eyes cold with determination. They reached the command center, and the door slid open. Inside, General Varric stood with several armed soldiers, all pointing their weapons at the princess and her team. The betrayal was complete. He had already aligned himself with the enemy, and now he was ready to deliver the final blow. "You were a fool to trust me," Varric sneered, his voice cold and calculating. "Now your planet will fall." The princess's eyes burned with fury. "You were the fool, Varric," she spat, stepping forward, her weapon in hand. "You thought you could betray me and get away with it. But you're wrong." The tension in the room was unbearable as both sides faced off, ready for the final confrontation. David's mind raced. They had to stop Varric, and they had to do it quickly. If they didn't, everything they had fought for would be lost. This battle, however, was no longer just about defeating enemies on the battlefield. It was about trust, about the deep scars that betrayal left behind. And now, David and the princess would have to face the consequences together, no matter how painful. As the room filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and the fate of the planet hung in the balance, David couldn't help but wonder if they could ever truly move past the betrayal, or if it would haunt them forever. The confrontation with General Varric was unlike anything David had faced before. The betrayal had cut deeper than any weapon could. Varric's face was twisted with a cruel smile, but David saw the princess's anger, raw, unfiltered, burning in her eyes. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was personal. "You were always weak," Varric mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You couldn't see it, but I've been planning this for years. All of you are nothing more than pawns in a game I've already won." David's grip tightened on his weapon. He was ready to fight, ready to take down this traitor who had once been a trusted ally. But the princess stepped forward, her voice cold and commanding. "Enough, Varric," she said, her tone sharp. "I know what you've done. You've betrayed your people, your planet, and me. This ends now." Varric's soldiers, who had once stood proudly by his side, now hesitated. The princess's strength, her conviction, was like a weapon in itself. David could see it in their eyes. They were beginning to doubt their leader's cause. The betrayal, as it turned out, was not only personal, it had fractured the very core of the enemy's forces. "Don't you see?" Varric hissed. "You're just a fool. You think you can fight me. Your planet is already lost. Your people." He stopped mid-sentence, his face shifting from confident to confused. The princess's expression softened slightly. "You were once my most trusted general. But now, you've shown me who you really are. It's over, Varric." David watched as the princess's words began to take root. The enemy soldiers looked around, unsure, questioning their loyalty. Some dropped their weapons, others exchanged glances, as if realizing that they had been following the wrong person all along. The tide of battle was shifting, and David could see that Varric was losing control. In that moment, the princess's eyes met David's. There was no more anger in them, only sadness. "This isn't just about defeating an enemy anymore," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "This is about healing, about showing my people that they can trust again." David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The battle had always been more than just about fighting. It was about breaking down walls, trust, betrayal, and fear. But as the princess looked at her former general, now cowering before her, David saw something new. The princess wasn't just fighting for her planet anymore. She was fighting for herself. "Varric, you are under arrest," the princess said firmly, her voice unwavering. "You will answer for your actions. Your betrayal will not be forgiven." Varric, now visibly shaken, tried to resist, but it was too late. The princess's guards had moved in, securing him before he could make another move. As he was taken away, he cast one final, hateful glance at the princess. David stood beside her, watching the traitor being led out. For a moment, they were silent, both absorbing the gravity of what had just happened. The battle was over, but the damage had been done. Trust had been shattered, and it would take time to rebuild. "You did it," David said softly. "You showed them that you're more than just a ruler. You're a leader." The princess didn't answer right away. She simply turned to him, her face calm, though there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes. It was gratitude, perhaps, but more than that. It was respect. "I didn't do it alone," she said quietly. "And I won't rebuild this alone, either." David smiled, his heart lightening just a little. For the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of something important, something worth fighting for. The betrayal was behind them now, but the road ahead would be long. The princess had been tested, and she had come through stronger. And with David by her side, she would lead her people to a future built on trust, not fear. Together, they would move forward, and together, they would rebuild. The days that followed Varric's betrayal were filled with rebuilding, not just the physical walls of the palace, but the trust between the princess and her people. The war was not over, but it had shifted. The princess, though scared by the betrayal, was now more determined than ever to protect her world. David had become a constant presence at her side, his advice and support something she never thought she would need from a human. They stood together on the palace balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, a serene contrast to the chaos they had faced. The air was calm, almost peaceful, and for a brief moment, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift. "You know," the princess said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd be standing here, in this position, looking at my people and wondering if I can truly lead them." David glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through a lot. No one can lead without doubt, but what matters is that you never gave up. That's what makes you a leader." The princess didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the landscape, her thoughts far away. "I've lost so much. So many people I trusted, my father, my generals, even my closest friends." Her voice was quieter now, almost fragile. "But in the end, it wasn't about me. It was about the people I swore to protect." David stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "You've proven yourself. Your people see that now." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "And you, David. I never thought a human could make a difference. But you did. You're not like the others. You've shown me that not all humans are the same." David smiled. "I'm just a man, Your Highness, trying to do the right thing." The princess shook her head. "No, you're more than that. You've helped me when no one else could. You've shown me that there's still hope, and that, maybe, not everything is lost." David's heart swelled at her words. He had always known the stakes of this mission, but hearing her say it, hearing her acknowledge his role in her world, made everything they had been through worth it. "There's still a lot to do," he said, his tone serious. "The enemy won't stop just because of one victory. We need to prepare." The princess nodded. "I know, but we'll face them. Together." David looked at her, his gaze firm. Together. They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet weight of their words hanging in the air. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more challenges, and more moments of doubt, but for the first time in a long while, the princess felt a flicker of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The war was far from over, but the princess had finally started to believe that peace wasn't just a dream. With David by her side, with the trust they had built between them, maybe, just maybe, this planet had a chance at a future without fear. As the stars began to appear in the sky, they turned toward the palace. The light of the setting sun had faded, but a new light, one of hope and determination, was just beginning to shine in their hearts. Together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, they would face it as equals. The weeks that followed Varric's arrest were filled with both progress and challenges. The princess, no longer burdened by the weight of betrayal, began to rebuild the trust of her people. She had earned it back, not through words, but through actions. Her leadership, once cold and calculated, was now tempered with warmth and strength. She wasn't just a ruler anymore. She had become a symbol of resilience, the embodiment of hope for her planet. David stayed by her side, his presence as steady as ever. He had become an integral part of the princess's inner circle, offering his advice, his courage, and his unwavering loyalty. As time passed, it became clear that their bond was no longer just that of allies. There was something deeper between them now, something unspoken. Their respect for each other had grown into trust, and that trust had formed the foundation of a powerful partnership. One evening, as they stood at the edge of the palace's garden, David glanced at the princess. She was gazing up at the stars, her eyes soft and thoughtful. The night sky was clear, and the light from the twin moons bathed the garden in a silvery glow. "You've changed," David said quietly, his voice low. The princess turned to look at him, a slight smile playing on her lips. "You've helped me change," she replied. "I never thought I'd be standing here, in this moment, with a human by my side." David chuckled softly. "I never thought I'd be standing here either. But here we are." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars twinkle above them. It was a peaceful night, one that felt like a new beginning. The weight of the past was still there, but it didn't seem so heavy anymore. Together, they had overcome the impossible, and now they were looking toward a future that was theirs to shape. "I never thought I could trust anyone again," the princess said after a while, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "After everything I've been through, I didn't think I could let anyone in. But you've shown me that it's possible." David met her gaze, his eyes soft. "I didn't want to force my way into your world. I just wanted to help. And I'll keep helping, no matter what." The princess smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that came from the heart. "You've done more than help. You've made me believe in something again. In my people, in myself. You've shown me that we don't have to face the darkness alone." David's heart swelled. He hadn't expected the journey to be easy, but it had been worth it. The princess had come a long way since he first met her, and he had too. What they had built together was more than a friendship. It was a partnership forged in trust, respect, and shared experiences. And that, David realized, was something worth fighting for. The princess turned to face him fully now, her expression serious yet filled with warmth. "I can't do this without you," she said quietly. "You're not just a soldier, David. You're part of my world now, part of our future." David nodded, a sense of purpose filling him. "And I won't leave. I'm here for the long haul." They both turned their gaze back to the stars, a quiet understanding passing between them. The future was uncertain, and the galaxy still held many dangers. But as long as they stood together, they knew they could face whatever came next. The war was far from over, but the battle for trust had been won. And with that victory, they had found something far more valuable: hope. As they walked back into the palace, side by side, the doors closed behind them, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The galaxy was vast, filled with both darkness and light, but for the first time, they knew they wouldn't have to face it alone. Together, they would rebuild, stronger than before.